Welcome, everyone. Michael Hingson has been involved with the development and implementation of assistive technology for the blind since he worked to help bring the Kurzweil Reading Machine for the blind to a production status. He will discuss in this informative and discussion-oriented session some of the devices he has used and helped to create. He will talk about where technology fits into education of blind children and students. Given the new technologies on the horizon, he will discuss and demonstrate some of the newest revolutionary technologies that will be impacting people who are blind worldwide, including students of all ages. There will be lots of times for questions and discussions, so bring your thoughts and questions. Thank you.
So as long as you have your microphone active, I love to interact and love to make this as two-way as possible. So I'm curious for all of you here, what do you want to hear about?
Everything. Hold on, let me bring the mic to you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to make every person come up with one thing, okay?
Put them to work.
Hi, my name is Susanna Albert, and I'm curious to know just technology. I have a student that is having a hard time, and I'm not sure. I teach children with autism, preschoolers, so they're at a hard age to just figure out, and I suspect there is some visual, damage going on.
Okay.
Hi, yes, my name is Mildred, and I just want to hear about everything. I think everything will work for everybody because sometimes we really don't know where to start.
Hi, my name is Mike Fletcher, and I'm here too to hear about everything in technology and anything new that's coming out, or so.
All that stuff. Okay.
Hi, my name is Nathaniel, and I look forward to learning about what type of technology is available to those at a younger age who are severely impacted, especially like ID, intellectual disability, and what kind of technology can support them.
I'm Julia White. I'm actually probably coming at this at a slightly different angle than most of you. I work on course materials for college courses. So adult learners and how that might impact their learning would be interesting.
Hi, my name is Lula Ali. I want to know everything. I want to know what is out there that I can use to help my students.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. Same with Lula. I'm just here to try to learn what technologies we can use to help our preschool students in our class.
Hi, I'm Ginger Brown, and I have a preschool for visually impaired students. I'm particularly interested in technology for totally blind and students. I actually have a student who is visually impaired and hearing impaired. And that should do it, Michael. Oh, one more.
We haven't heard from Kathy yet.
Kathy left.
Oh, well, she was going to stay. Okay, we have one more, yes.
Hi, Michael. This is Jane, and I'm interested in everything. I'm here to educate myself about all the technologies out there that supporting the visual impaired students.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I asked that question for two reasons, and you all helped a great deal. One was I really wanted to hear specifically what your overall interests are, because I believe that if I get locked into just my agenda alone, it may not be what is of interest to you, so I like to get that. And also I wanted to see kind of the scope of what we need to do, and I think I've got a good sense of that. I am blind. I have been blind my whole life, and needless to say, that tends to be where my prejudices get oriented in terms of what we talk about. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about, or mostly what I'm going to talk about, has to do in one way or another with eyesight. I want to start, though, by telling you that in discussing the technologies today and discussing all the different kinds of devices that have come, that are coming, that are here, and so on. I want to do it from a little bit of a philosophical standpoint. That is to say, it's great to talk about the technology, but here's the real deal. None of it really matters if we don't deal with a basic philosophy. And the philosophy in this case will be blindness-oriented. Let me define for you what I believe is the definition that we should use when we're talking about blindness. I believe that any individual is blind, or let me rephrase that, any individual ought to be considered blind for the purposes of training and education and access. I believe any person is blind when their eyesight diminishes to the point where they have to use alternative techniques to accomplish tasks that they would normally be able to do if they had full eyesight. That's another way of saying, I don't care if a child is totally blind or if they are legally blind under a definition or whatever. If their eyesight has gone to the point of diminishing substantially to where they have to use closed-circuit televisions, magnifiers, large print, or whatever, I classify that child as blind. Why? Because no matter what you say, no matter what you do as a teacher, that individual, for example, will never read as well using large print, using magnification technology and such, as they would be able to do if they learn Braille, especially at a younger age. And I'll discuss more of that as we go forward. Furthermore,
I'm going to interrupt, just Kathy Wall did just walk.
Oh, good.
I'm just waiting. I'm waiting.
Yeah, well, we asked everybody else what they wanted to hear. Do you have anything you want to hear? You have to be put on the spot like everyone else. Oh!
I'm just glad to be here.
Okay, she's cheating. Okay, so that is a definition that is different than what most of you probably deal with. You distinguish between totally blind and partially blind kids or adults. The fallacy of that is most of those people will probably lose more of their eyesight. The problem is that because they don't see as well as a fully sighted individual, their mobility may very well be impaired in some conditions in their life. Let me give you a perfect example. I know a gentleman who, as an adult, started losing his eyesight in New Jersey. He went to the New Jersey Commission for the Blind and they gave him a cane and they said, you kind of should really start to learn to use this cane, but you've got your eyesight, you should really use your eyesight as much as you can because you can see and you're not totally blind yet. And they didn't really emphasize cane use for him. They certainly didn't emphasize Braille use or any of the other kinds of technologies that totally blind people have to use as opposed to what partially sighted people get to use. And I've heard that expression so many times. Sally gets to read print. Johnny has to read Braille. I have stood in departments of education around this country and heard those exact words. And that's unfortunate because this gentleman in New Jersey, for example, one day was walking to work. And the way he walked to work, he lived in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, had to take a train into Philadelphia to work. He was walking along the New Jersey Transit line to get on the train to go over the river into Philadelphia. Saw up ahead of him, wasn't using his cane, he had it with him, but he wasn't really using it. Saw up ahead the opening to go into a car, got to the opening, turned right, and promptly fell between two train cars. It was a little bit of a cloudy day, and he didn't see that it wasn't a train car, but it was rather the coupling between the cars. If he had used a cane, he would have known that. I believe we are doing a disservice to our partially blind kids when we do not teach them the techniques that totally blind people use. There are two reasons to teach them those techniques. Reason one, because it will make them more efficient. Reason two, because if they don't start learning early that it is okay to be blind, there's nothing psychologically, morally, or anything else wrong with being blind. If they don't start to learn that early, it's going to get harder later in life. In our rehabilitation system, we don't do a good job of teaching that. And so people may have eyesight, but they don't learn blindness techniques. Oh, well, you can learn that when you lose more eyesight. When do you cross that line? So I just defined it. When a child or an individual loses enough eyesight or has sufficiently not enough eyesight that they have to use alternative techniques to standard eyesight to accomplish tasks, we ought to consider them blind and we ought to teach them Braille. I just talked to a gentleman yesterday morning in another state, admittedly, but I'll bet I could find it in this state. He has a daughter who is 10 years old with eyesight of 2600 in one eye and 2800 in the other eye. She's 10 years old and they will not teach her Braille. She has 4 hours a month at most of mobility training. And he has finally learned that that's not acceptable and that the school district should be doing a lot more than they are.
Michael, I'm going to interrupt for a second. Just to let you know you have 2 more visitors.
Okay.
Okay.
So what we asked, and we'll stop, what we asked at the beginning is, what do you want to get out of this presentation? What are you interested in? So you walk in late, you have to answer.
Oh, no problem. Okay, hold on. Let me show you how to use the microphone. It's being streamed.
We're not picking on you specifically.
No problem.
Everybody else had to.
My name is Michelle. I'm an orientation mobility teacher. I also used to be a teacher of visually impaired students. I'm here. Why am I here? Well,
That's the question.
Why not?
Okay.
Great to hear somebody else's perspective.
Okay. Anyone else? You said there were 2?
Hi, my name is Haley Goodlett, and I'm a teacher of the visually impaired, and finishing up my orientation mobility. I'm also legally blind, so I'm really excited to hear you speak and hear your perspective.
Okay.
Thank you.
Be proud. She has a folding cane, Michael.
That's okay. I have in my briefcase or backpack a telescoping cane, so that's okay. So, and a guide dog on the floor, but she doesn't fit in the backpack, but she tries to dive into it when she knows that there are milk bones in there. So I believe that we really need to reassess how we deal with low vision kids. And we also need to reassess how we deal with totally blind kids, because ultimately what it comes down to, and I listened to Jose this morning and all of the things that he said, I believe that we have progressed an incredible amount technologically. We have not progressed much at all attitudinally as a society and as an educational system. We haven't really dealt with some of the basic issues. So let me talk a little bit about technology history, and I'll show you why I think that way. So I'm going to mainly deal with technology from my standpoint of growing up from the 1950s. He mentioned the 80s, so anybody remember the 50s? I know you don't remember them, but I mean, it's deep, dark history, right? But I remember Shaboom and all those kinds of songs, and in the 1957, the Sputnik was launched and all that. So, you know, that was a long time ago, right? But when I was born, and it was discovered 4 months later that I was blind due to what at the time was called retrolental fibroplasia, now retinopathy or prematurity, basically given too much oxygen and so on. My parents were told to send me away because there was no way that a blind child could ever grow up to be a contributor to society, and my parents rejected that. They worked within the school districts in Chicago to get me and other blind kids in the Chicago area who were born prematurely. They worked to get us an education. And at the age of 4, as happens in Chicago, I went to kindergarten and went to a special class in kindergarten, a special kindergarten class all day, where I got to do things like learn Braille. I got exposed to a Perkins Brailler, probably one of the most revolutionary devices of its time, because it was an easy to use, portable, lightweight, very efficient way of producing Braille, so that a person could sit down and transcribe material or write material in Braille or whatever, if they were a student or somebody doing books for people. And it is still somewhat used today, although we have finally progressed from the Perkins Brailler to other things which we'll get to. But the Perkins Brailler allowed people to produce Braille materials. We hadn't really, in the educational scheme of things, gone far beyond the American Printing House for the Blind producing Braille and producing some text materials. But in 1948, an organization began called Recording for the Blind that on very thin plastic flexible discs, 7 inches in diameter, started recording books. And over the 1950s, RFB grew, the number of books they produced grew, and we started to see societally a trend, which was that more material was recorded, even for totally blind kids, than was converted to Braille. Why? Because it was easier, didn't need nearly as much technological expertise, you didn't need to know Braille. If you were doing a calculus book, you just needed to have enough technical expertise to read calculus, so you had to have had some training in that, but you didn't need to know Braille. And fairly quickly into the 60s and beyond, technology allowed for inexpensive and effective recording of material. The problem is that made us good listeners, although my wife isn't always convinced that's true, but it did not necessarily make even totally blind kids good readers, because Braille began to be de-emphasized. It's estimated that in the 50s, the literacy rate for blind people was roughly 50%. Over time, that has decreased to 10% because we have de-emphasized Braille. It's old technology. Well, if that's the case, why do we teach sighted kids to read print? Let's let them watch cartoons, let them watch TV. Why do we teach them anything in print? We know why, because we should, we have to, and people need to read and write. But we don't put the same demands on blind kids. For partially blind kids, over time, technology has grown to the point where we have a lot of ways of producing very large characters, even to the point of one character taking an entire screen with closed-circuit televisions. And into the 60s, into the 70s, we started to see the advent of closed-circuit television, and we started to see ways of producing and a demand for producing more and more large print. The demand for older adults wasn't really there because the baby boomer era had not gotten to the point where there were all that many people in the senior age who were starting to lose their eyesight and needed to find alternatives to not being able to, or to being able to see. But over the 60s and into the 70s, we started to see ways that people were making print available to people who couldn't see as well as they used to, at least to some degree. Some of that technology was pretty expensive. We still hadn't done a lot beyond the Perkins Brailler going into the early 70s to make it possible for Braille to be produced and for in a more effective and efficient and inexpensive way. And we certainly hadn't developed technologies yet that truly made it possible for a blind student or a blind individual to quickly emboss material or have a way to have material available in Braille. And I submit that that's a problem because the result is that blind people, again, got to be pretty good listeners, but not great readers. In the audio world, for recording, like with Recording for the Blind, they developed a technology that when books started to be produced on tapes instead of flexible discs, you could use a tape recorder that was slightly modified so that as you fast forwarded it, the tape still brushed against the heads of the recorder like they did when it was just in play mode. And in fast forward, there were beeps that you could hear as you passed each page. So you could fairly quickly, in a linear way, find beginnings of, find page numbers or beginnings of chapters, because Recording for the Blind developed this thing basically where you put in two very low audible tones that when you wound your tape fast, they went beep, beep, and you heard the beginning of a chapter. You could stop and you could go on and do what you needed to do. So they kind of had ways of making the audio a little bit more accessible in the 70s. Braille still was mostly doing what it had been before. It was just kind of moving along, no major revolutions. The closest thing to a major revolution for mass production of Braille was that if you were a transcriber and you transcribed material into Braille for someone to use, this company was formed called the American Thermoform Corporation that would take plastic sheets. You could take a Braille page that was printed in paper, put the plastic sheet over it, put it in this machine that subjected the two of them to a vacuum and heated them so that the plastic then formed to the shape of the Braille page. And suddenly, within a few seconds, you actually could produce...
226-2883.
Shut up. Thank you. You could fairly quickly produce another copy of the Braille material. So that happened. In the late 70s, we started to hear about non-permanent or refreshable Braille displays. The first one I ever saw was from a gentleman named Oleg Tretikov, who developed a device that literally would take an ASCII file, a computer file, and produce it on refreshable Braille cells. And then other companies came along and did that. In the 1970s also, probably the most significant company early in the 70s that was formed was a company called Telesensory Systems, Inc. in Stanford that developed a device called the Opticon. Anybody familiar with the Opticon? No? You've heard of it?
Yes.
So the Opticon was a device that took a camera that you held in one hand and you ran it across a page, and the other hand would rest on this device that actually would produce character by character under your finger a picture of the printed character that the camera was seeing. And people learned to actually use it and read at 60 and 70 words per minute. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you? You were going to say something else?
No.
And so some people learned to use it. The problem with the Opticon was really print wasn't made to be felt, it was made to be seen. And they didn't take another step to scan that and convert that material into Braille. That was a little bit more complicated because what you needed to do in order to convert it to Braille was truly recognize the character with a computer and then allow the computer to then convert it into Braille and put it under your finger or emboss it. Optical character recognition didn't really come into its own until a little bit later into the 70s. But in 1974, a gentleman named Raymond Kurzweil came along and he said, I've got a machine that will do that. I've got a machine that can take a page, scan it, develop an image of the page, and I can feed that image into a computer. I don't care what type fonts are on the page, how many type fonts, whether it's typed or printed or both on the same page, unit width or proportionally spaced type or both on a page, and it will actually read it out loud. He went to various government agencies who all said, yeah, that sounds really lovely, but we're not interested in funding anything like that. And so he eventually went to the National Federation of the Blind. And the National Federation of the Blind, like most people said, were very skeptical about this because everybody always says they had the greatest thing. But he was so insistent that they went and looked at his machine and brought their own material, and his machine read it. Look at the doors that opens. Suddenly, a blind person or anyone can take a book, put it down on his scanner, and it will read it out loud. Still no Braille, but it could be, because if the camera scanned the page, the computer recognized the page, it then converted it to an ASCII or computer readable form. Now the output from his machine from that computer readable form happened to be voice output, but it could have been used to produce Braille as well. That didn't really happen, but still print suddenly became more and more available to blind people than ever before. The problem with the machine was it cost $50,000, and not too many of us had that as discretionary spending or even crucial spending, because $50,000 is a whole heck of a lot. I don't know about you, but it is to me. And so teachers are so overpaid. You guys probably don't worry about that, right? And so it still was producing voice. And I understand why Ray did that. He did develop a commercial version of it, and called a Kurzweil data entry machine that would allow others to read print and put the data into computer databases and so on, like Lawyers Need or book publishers and so on, and it was a very accurate system. But Braille still was really not emphasized. Again, I hope you understand why I keep bringing it back to Braille. Braille is the only true reading and writing language available to blind people. And I submit it isn't just totally blind people. It isn't just totally blind kids, because most of the partially blind kids that get subjected to reading print and not learning Braille can't read it for long periods of time, can't read it as quickly, never will read it as quickly, and may very well lose the rest of their eyesight, and then where will they be? We really need to recognize the value of what Braille brings. However, we'll go on. So Kurzweil's machine became part of the world, and over time the price dropped, and eventually it got to be, in fact, an app on a smartphone. So now I turned my voice off. I wonder if I can get it back.
3 notifications.
There we go.
Google Voice, 4 minutes ago. Passcode field. 8.
I am going to show you.
Settings. 85% battery power.
I don't want that. I want
Paper
this.
books folder.
I'm going
14
to
apps.
open up my app.
Actions, books. Heading. Knfb reader. Actions,
And I know that there's a page
reader.
taped to this box, and I can feel it doesn't. I can feel something that it's probably something that was copied, so there's
Take picture.
probably real print. So I'm going to lift the camera up and take a picture of what's on that box,
Take picture.
and let's see what it does.
Pause. WIUT win. Press hard and hold to turn projector on. Dock cam and computer 2 connections. Input. Press desired input button 2x. Volume of input. Press and hold the volume up or down button. Red volume level is achieved. F system. Press and hold projector off 7 button for 5 seconds. Santa Clara County.
Get the picture? For $99, I can now read print. Now, the other thing about this, by the way, is that I can also,
Knfb reader. Active.
because of
Closing Knfb
technology,
reader. Settings. Active.
I could now convert that to Braille. Because what did start to happen is that refreshable Braille displays got to be demanded by any number of blind people. Into the 80s, into the 90s, Telesensory Systems built one. Other companies built one. Humanware was formed, built the Braille Note. HIMS Technology and other companies built various refreshable Braille displays. I use a device called the Braille Edge. And I can, in fact, because technology has gotten to the point of being smartly developed by people, I can now, in fact, use Bluetooth connections to actually communicate what came out of my iPhone as the Knfb reader was reading it, and have it transmitted directly to the Braille Edge and read it as Braille. So Braille has gotten to be pretty inexpensive to produce, relatively so. Braille cells are still very difficult in terms of refreshable Braille displays to produce. So this device costs about $2,900 or $3,000 for a 40-cell display. We still haven't really brought the cost down as much as we should. But Braille finally made the leap in early 2000s to be a technology that is relatively inexpensive, absolutely easy to produce. Transcribers don't use the Perkins Brailler anymore. They can type into a computer or use optical character recognition to scan books, then use a computer to correct any errors that are made, even using math, and the appropriately trained transcribers can do math, and produce good quality computer files that can either go on something like the Braille Edge, or it can be used to produce Braille on paper or whatever. And so it has finally progressed to the point where it's not that difficult and not that expensive to produce. The problem is the attitude hasn't changed. And so it's so much easier to hear it. Recording for the Blind and Dyslexic was created out of Recording for the Blind, and now it's called Learning Ally. And they have gone to the point of producing audio texts in a very digital way that allow you to easily navigate around a book. But again, for a person who doesn't read print, if you're blind, it's all about you're still listening to it. What do you lose? You don't gain the ability to learn to spell. You don't gain the ability to spell. You don't gain the knowledge of what words should be spelled as. You don't learn the grammar that one needs to learn. Braille is absolutely important for us to get back to using with every blind child in school. Now, I recognize there are degrees of ability to read Braille. Intellectual disabilities and so on may make some of that more difficult to do, or maybe we need to get more creative about how we teach it. But I submit that we are doing a disservice to many of our children if we are not giving them the same opportunity to learn to truly read that we give to our sighted population of students. And I think that's really something that we need to emphasize a great deal. The fact is that technology has progressed a great deal, but what hasn't progressed in the same way are attitudes about technology, or about how to use technology, and about how to really deal with blindness and other kinds of disabilities like that. Inclusion is a wonderful thing, but it's only inclusive if we truly make it so. If we truly use the technology to create the same kind of inclusion that we expect everyone else and everyone else to deal with and everyone else to practice. We need to practice it with disabilities much more than we do. So I do emphasize Braille a lot when I talk about it and talk about technology, because I think it's the most dramatic example of how technology has progressed a lot, but ironically, it has created less of an accessible society for us. Look at Google that acquired, 10 billion books, and they announced that they were going to put all those books online, but had absolutely no intention of making them accessible. It's ironic that we live in a society where so much can be made available and even made accessible, but we don't make it a practice and we don't make it a mindset to demand of ourselves that we make all of that technology and all of the things that we get out of it inclusive. It took a major court case that went, I believe, to the Supreme Court to get Google to be compelled to make those books accessible when they put them online. And accessible means, for the purposes of this, that they're in a computer somewhere. If they're in a computer, they can be produced in Braille. So I can download, or however it's possible to access those materials, they can be downloaded, and Braille could be produced on a device like the Braille Edge just as easily as you would read it on a computer screen. It's that simple, really. Now, there are different kinds of Braille. There's what's called grade 1, which is just letter for letter, and there's what's called grade 2, which has a lot of contractions, and there are rules that need to be followed to properly produce in a production environment a book in Braille grade 2, so that everything is just as it should be, just like we do with print. We have standards for printing material. But if I, as a user, want to produce grade 2, I can cope with a few errors if I can get access to the material. If you were a Braille transcriber or an organization producing Braille for public consumption, you would more conform to the rules than I. But even so, the fact is that if the material is put in a computer-readable form that we have access to, then suddenly it's available. And now it goes back to what's our mindset. Do we just say, oh, kids can listen to them, to the books? Oh, adults can listen to them. Oh, they're going blind, they're not going to learn Braille later in life. Or do we put higher demands on ourselves? Now, I recognize that an 80-year-old who loses their eyesight is probably not going to want to spend a lot of time learning Braille. But they might want to learn Braille well enough to be able to take a few notes and be able to do things without making a lot of noise about it. I, for example, hate talking watches. And the reason I do is that if I'm in a meeting, I don't want to hear a watch that suddenly says, it's 11:22 a.m. I want to read it in Braille, and I can. I can sit here and sneak looks at my watch all day, and of course you know it because you can see me doing it, but nobody can hear it. And that's as it should be. I don't want to hear you when you look at your watch. I don't want to hear it talk. Or maybe we should demand that you guys all have to have talking watches too, then we're all equal. But the reality is that the tactile access of material is what we do and what we should do. It's not a bad thing. What it really reflects on is an attitude about what blindness is and what it isn't. We still, as a society, haven't truly gotten to the point where we can accept that it's not a bad thing if someone happens to be blind. I was in an IKEA store, actually near where I used to live in Novato, Emeryville, is I think where we were. And a 13-year-old boy came up to me while we were in the store. I should also point out my wife happens to be a person with a so-called disability. She uses a wheelchair. And so she was using a power chair at that time, as she does today. This young man came up and he said, "I'm sorry," out of the clear blue. And I said, because it was pretty obvious he was looking at me, I was behind my wife and he was standing next to me, so he was talking to me. And I said, "Well, why are you sorry?" "Well, because you can't see." That is so telling. I kind of probably didn't respond in the best possible way possible because I said, "Well, I'm pretty sorry about you." And he said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Because you can, you don't get it." And we didn't get to carry on the discussion because his mother came and got him. It would have been fun to continue the discussion and maybe he would have learned something. But we need to change our overall attitudes about blindness. And I think it's as important and it's as prevalent in education, that is the need to change our attitudes, as it is in the rest of society. I see it all too often where kids don't grow up truly getting the blindness skills, truly getting the concepts in their minds that it's okay if they happen to be blind. It's not a bad thing, it's not the end of the world, it's the way you are. It's no worse being blind than it is to be male or female or left-handed or very tall or very short or whatever. It is a characteristic and we should accept that. I do recognize that we live in a world that has a whole lot more people with eyesight than who happen to be blind. A whole lot more people, and that's okay, some of my best friends are sighted, but I also recognize that all of you who are sighted have your own disabilities. You know, up until the 1860s or so, you had a real hard time dealing with stuff at night. You had to have a torch, glad somebody invented fire, so you could have some light to see by, because without that, it was very difficult for you to function at night. And then we invented candles and so on, and that was great. But then Thomas Edison and others came along and developed this thing called the electric light bulb. If we look at the electric light bulb in the parlance of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the electric light bulb is simply a reasonable accommodation for light-dependent people who cannot function in the dark. Us normal people do really well in the dark. I can read in the dark. How about you? But I recognize that all the light bulb happened to be a reasonable accommodation to give you light access when you didn't have it otherwise available to you. Except Braille and some of the other things that I require as the same, even though there aren't that many of us and so we tend to be a curiosity. It doesn't really change anything. The fact is that whether it's Braille, whether it's a device that produces or allows me to read Braille, whether it's other kinds of technologies, it's still just as reasonable accommodation, and it's as reasonable for me to expect to be able to have that accommodation. Well, dealing with other kinds of technologies, calculators came along. I think the real first general production calculator that I recall was from Telesensory Systems. It was called the Speech Plus, a 4-function calculator. It also did square roots and a couple things like that. Then there were a few other companies that took regular commercially available calculators and developed technology around them to have their outputs come out in a readable form. There's a company called Science for the Blind in Pennsylvania that took for example, the HP 97, which was a desktop calculator with a paper printer on it. The people there created a base for the calculator that it mounted on, and that base tapped into the output technology in the calculator. Rather than just driving the screen, the technology also drove a device that produced speech output for whatever the calculator produced. It was the first time that relatively easily a blind person had real access to a fully scientific calculator working in Polish notation. And if you don't know what Polish notation is, then go back and look at some HP calculators. It's a really convenient way of interacting with calculator systems that I think is even used still today. And it is a way that you can have a very fast method of interacting and entering numbers and getting what you need. It's actually very logical. No Polak jokes. I had one and lost it in the World Trade Center. If I had known that we were never going to be coming back to that building, I would have taken that calculator and put it in a backpack and carried it with me. But unfortunately, I didn't get to do that. So I miss it. And it was something that wasn't mass produced. Only a few of them were made. So now getting it is just not overly doable. Yes, we have computer software that produces the same kind of results, but it's still not the same. Anyway, so calculators did come along. So a lot of different kinds of technologies in one way or another have been made available to us. Calculators, faster ways of producing Braille, ways of producing material in a spoken form, ways of accessing that material. But we haven't seen the progression in attitudes. So Blackboard.com, or Blackboard as a company, only recently started making their material accessible. Even the app that we use for this conference, I was just speaking to the woman who is out providing technical support, and I said to her, as I look at your app, it's unfortunate that I can't easily tell what's a heading and what's a button. And her response was, yeah, we know, and our app developers are really working on that. What's the problem with that? This app has been around for more than a year. Why didn't they do it up front as part of making the app available? I know it's been around for more than a year because I used the app to attend another conference back in May of 2016. So we're actually talking about more than a year and a half, and I suspect that that wasn't the first time the app was ever used. Why is it that people are just working on it now? That's the standard line. Why is it that we don't make accessibility a part of our basic mindset and ensure that accessibility comes out at the same time the regular product does? Because in reality, it is the regular product. Apple, for many years, would not make their products accessible. It took the threat of a lawsuit to get Apple to finally recognize that it needed to make its products accessible too. Now, it also took a lawsuit against Target.com because Target wouldn't make their website accessible for blind people. It would have cost Target, we estimate, about $40,000 to do it. By the time the lawsuit got settled in 2007, it cost Target $8 million because they wouldn't do it. They've done a pretty good job of making the website accessible, although I hear that they're starting to slip back into some old habits, so the message didn't really totally catch forever. But because of that, Apple agreed to make their products accessible. They're the first company that built accessibility right into the operating system. Anyone who has an iPhone can turn on accessibility today and turn on a voice and make that voice verbalize whatever comes across the screen. What Apple didn't do, however, was take the last little step. That is to say, what Apple didn't do was to mandate that apps, as they are developed, have a basic level of accessibility. And yes, I know that there are a lot of visual things about a lot of apps, but at least controls on apps could be made accessible. I have a master's degree in physics. I do a lot of physicsy things. And I get curious about the universe and so on. And I get curious about other things. it would be so much easier if I could manipulate a lot of these visually oriented apps and ask someone, what do you see? Rather than trying to describe to them my thought pattern to get them to fool around with the system and finally get to where we really want to be. If I could manipulate it and allow my thought processes to control what was being seen on a screen, even though I know that the visual output might not be able to be made accessible. We're talking about maps and other kinds of things that aren't easily lending themselves to be verbal. If I could manipulate and do the basics of getting something for someone to look at, that would be so much more effective. But Apple did not choose to set up basic standards. They have what they call guidelines, but there's no mandate. And why is that important? Because it's not that hard to do, and unfortunately, the other side of that is true. For example, there is a company called Blindfold Games that makes a bunch of different games. Anybody ever heard of them? They make a lot of games. They're apps on an iPhone. The owner of that company, earlier this year, wanted to put an announcement about a new game in the App Store. Now, these games are specifically made for blind people. They don't do visual displays. Apple came back and rejected his app because it didn't have enough visual content in the announcement to tell people what the app was about. And he said, but this is for blind people. Yeah, but sighted people need to be able to see what it's about too. But it doesn't go the other way. There isn't something that says blind people need to see what it's about and have access to it too. We live in a double standard world, to be real blunt. We don't need to have that. And I tell you all of this because you are the ones that are truly setting the stage and who will be very much involved and who are involved in training the next generation of kids. Are those kids going to grow up to recognize that they can be as much a part of society as everyone else? And are we going to give them the opportunity to demand their place in the world? Or are we really going to say, you're different? And that's what it really comes down to. So technology has grown a lot, and it will continue to grow, and it will continue to change. And we'll get to see more of it. But how much of what we see and what we get will truly lend itself to making the world of blind people of all degrees of eyesight accessible and available to us, that is something that remains to be seen. Now, recently, in the last 2.5 years, another piece of technology has come about, and that is something that I do want to show you because it is kind of one of the most potentially revolutionary, where is it? Revolutionary products that I think we will be seeing for the next little while. There's a company that formed in San Diego, California called Aira. Has anyone heard of Aira? No. Oh, great. You guys will all get to see something new. Aira, A-I-R-A, website www.aira.io. Artificial Intelligence Remote Access. Aira is a product that uses smart glasses, like what I have on here. Not Google Glasses, although Google Glasses have been used. Google Glasses are very expensive, though, and they're not as programmable as some others. And we're going to see a lot of augmented reality glasses in the next few years because more and more people are going to want to use them in more and more different kinds of environments. Google's going to do other stuff with it. Other companies are developing them. Microsoft is working on it. Apple's working on it. A lot of companies are doing it. But in the case of Aira, here's what happens. Aira uses glasses, uses an app on a smartphone, and does the following. When I use the app on the smartphone to activate the system, a Wi-Fi connection is made between the glasses and the net, and a communication link is established between the glasses and Aira. Specifically, Aira at headquarters and around the country has agents. There are like 80 agents now, And those agents, when one of them gets a call from the glasses, they also get an audible call from my smartphone. The agent comes on and immediately sees everything that I see with my camera. So wherever I'm looking, the camera sees, the agent sees. The agent also gets a lot of auditory information about, the agent gets a lot of other digital information about my geography, my location, and so on, because the agent has access to Google Maps and Google Earth, and the iPhone and the glasses video stream transmits GPS and other digital information. So the agent sees where I am physically with the camera and sees where I am virtually and sees the surrounding area where I exist. So why is all that relevant? Because now I can call an IRA agent and literally I can get that agent to tell me any information that is not otherwise available to me. So I can reach up and turn the glasses on. I haven't had them on. We haven't been spying on you much. And the glasses will come on and I'm going to call an agent. I'm going to let you see what IRA can do. Okay, the glasses are coming on. Nice musical tone in my ear. I do all of my communicating with it through the iPhone. So we're not hearing the audio through the glasses, so you'll be able to hear it. Right now, IRA is working to establish the connection with the internet just to get everything established here. It's looking for the internet. It's connecting to my smartphone, which is what I'm using for my internet connection. And it has now told me that it's connected. So I need to do a couple of little gyrations that I normally wouldn't do, but I've now done them.
Connecting to server, ellipsis.
I'm going into the IRA app.
Searching for your glass, ellipsis.
Today, everything that IRA does is done through using a human agent.
Phone, selected, glass, button, phone, searching for your glass, ellipsis.
Still is establishing a glass connection.
Usage,
why are you doing that?
app switcher.
You know,
Glass,
nobody ever
phones,
said
heading,
technology
selected,
was totally
arrow,
easy.
glass, phone, button, searching for your glass, phone, button, selected. Wi-Fi, tap, app switcher.
I think I know
settings,
why.
Arrow,
There it is.
Settings, active.
Let's go back in here.
Settings.
I may have anticipated too early. But what I'm able to do today is, I'm going to turn the glasses off and turn them on again. What I'm able to do is to call an agent and literally get whatever information that I want to get. In the future, a lot more of this will be, probably the wrong term to use is automated, but I'll use it. A lot of it will be more computer accessible as opposed to using a live agent. For example, IRA has already announced that the app that I showed you on the phone, the Knfb Reader Mobile, will be part of IRA, so that I will be able to just use the glasses and the IRA app to be able to access the ability to read material. I've advocated that IRA should incorporate a barcode reader into the app so that I can look at cans and learn immediately what I'm looking at because IRA reads the barcode, and then I'm able to access the information. Facial recognition, object recognition, those are all things that technology is already working on, and we want to be able to make sure that some of those things are accessible to IRA so that I'm able to actually use the IRA technology with artificial intelligence to look around the room. If I had a friend, then I could use IRA to look at my friend and tell me who they are, because it'll also look at like my Facebook page, so it'll get the name of the person and so on. Well, we're having a problem dealing with a connection, so I'm not going to be able to do this right now. So I'm going to not worry about it. I'm sorry about that. It worked earlier. But bottom line is, what I can do is to access and get any information today using an agent, and in the future I'll be able to do it using artificial intelligence to augment what the agent does. It's a subscription plan. It means that students, for example, can get an assignment just like any other student would and go off to a library and not even have to find a person to read material. The IRA agent can do it, and that happens today. Going to the store means that I can now truly become a shopper and not just buying those things that I go to look at. I can actually have the agent tell me what's around me, tell me what sales are going on, and I can be able to buy using discretionary spending just like anyone else does, which is something that I could never do before. I am able to travel through airports much more effectively than I ever was able to do before. It's really kind of amazing the opportunities that are open, because one of the biggest problems that we have, needless to say, whether it be a lack of Braille or just a lack of access to material, is a lack of access to information. IRA opens those doors and makes it possible for me to get any information that I otherwise couldn't get. The agents are specifically trained to describe information and verbalize. They don't help, they give information. So an agent can't say it's safe to cross the street, or you have to turn right to go here. What they have to say is things like, I don't see cars coming, if I want to know that. But they can't tell me when it's safe to cross the street. First of all, it's a liability issue, and that's a judgment, and I'm the one that should be making judgments. An agent can tell me, if you want to go to baggage claim at the airport, you're going to have to turn right and there's an escalator down, but the agent doesn't say, go right. The agent tells me what I need to know so that I can make the decision. You see the subtle difference? But it's important. I should be making those judgment calls. IRA does not replace guide dogs, nor does it replace canes. It's a dramatic information source that otherwise wouldn't exist for me. So what I want to do, because I could talk about other kinds of technologies, what I'm going to do, we've got a half hour roughly.
Can I ask you one question?
That's what I was going to get to, is I'm going to open this up and let people ask questions. I think we have a roaming mic and we're streaming this, so if you would wait for the mic, that would be good. But yes, no question is off limits, so go ahead. If you disagree with everything I've said, that's okay, I want to hear it. Go ahead.
I was just curious, how often do you access IRA?
Daily.
Daily. Numerous times a day?
It depends on what I'm doing. Like traveling, I do numerous times a day. At home, not necessarily. It just depends on what I'm doing. So sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Okay. And how much is the subscription rate?
For you?
Well, no, just for
today,
a student.
We have a deal. But wait, there's one. There are 4 subscription plans today. And I'll answer, these are basically consumer plans. There are different plans that are at colleges and schools and so on. They're a lot different because they structure what they do and what they want to do differently. But there are 4 basic plans. $89 a month gets you 100 minutes a month. $129 a month gets you 200 minutes a month. $199 a month gets you 400 minutes a month. And $329 a month gets you unlimited service. If I'm a person at a college, for example, in an office for students with disabilities, I will spend more than $329 a month providing a reader for any blind person. So it's very economical, and then you don't have to worry about it. Even filling out forms, one of the neat things that we've had discussions about lately on the listserv for IRA users is all about, what if I got a form I want to fill out? Well, the IRA agent could take a picture of that form, print it out at their location, and IRA agents are all over the country. All you need is a good computer and a fast internet connection to be an agent. Well, and the ability to describe. And we're always looking for agents, by the way. But an agent could take a picture of the form and then read the questions to the IRA user, print the information on the form or whatever, and then scan it and send it back to the individual who could print it, and then the agent can say, here's where you need to sign, and actually direct them to the place on the form to sign it, and then the student or user or whoever could turn it in. People have done that at doctor's offices, for example. And so suddenly I have a way to fill out forms, because sometimes doctor's offices won't fill out forms for me. They should, but they don't. Oh, we can't do that. Yes, you can. Have you ever heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act? But sometimes it's better not to get into the fight. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Next.
Michael, I have 2 from online. One I'm going to do because it's connected to the other question about can repeat the new glasses technology. What is it called and how do you find it?
Okay, so the company is called Aira and the product is called Aira, A-I-R-A. So the website is www.aira.io. So it's not .com or anything like that. It's a new extension. So www.aira.io. And by the way, anyone is welcome to contact me to learn more about it, or after this presentation, you're welcome to contact me if I can answer any more questions for you about it. And I'm easy to get. It's mike@michaelhingson.com. So I'm easy to hunt down. And we're on the web at michaelhingson.com anyway.
Okay.
So that was one question.
Okay, here, there's two more.
Yeah, oh my gosh, sounds like the press.
Okay,
Another question, you're on.
Here comes a live one.
I was wondering if Aira is available in any other language.
Well, Aira is available with an agent who can speak whatever language they speak. So today, we do have some bilingual people who do speak Spanish. We'll be getting more. Right now, Aira is only available in the United States. That will also change dramatically over the next few years. It's really just coming out of being a startup. So they haven't done everything that they're going to in terms of making the product available in other countries. Now, if I travel abroad, I can take Aira with me, and as long as I have internet access, I can use it. But to sell it in other countries, that's a little bit further off just because of the logistics and the legalities involved. But yes, Aira is working to find more agents who can properly describe who do speak other languages. And if you know of anyone who might be really good at describing and speaks another language, then and might want some extra income, this is a way to do it. I will tell you that the process is very rigorous to go through to become an agent. Something over 1,000 people applied in June and 40 were hired.
Wow.
And that's because most people don't necessarily have the right aptitude and just don't get exactly what we need to do with describing. A lot of times agents will read personal information, and they are bound by very strict non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements, and so on. Aira is working to become certified to do HIPAA type things as well. But a lot of stuff doesn't necessarily fall under HIPAA. Like I can go to a doctor's office and use Aira to do anything I want concerning me because by definition I give permission. And for anyone else, if they give permission for an agent to read material for me, then that deals with HIPAA. But HIPAA is still an issue.
So one more question. The training, I mean, I'm like interested now. I do speak Spanish, and I do have families that are Spanish speaking. So for training for Aira, is there a website you would?
It's all done online.
Okay.
And that would all be done if you're accepted into the program. You would get access to the training materials and so on. And yes.
Michael, this was another online question, and I think it's referring to the Kurzweil app. It's what is the app he is using called when you were using your phone and doing the picture and reading it?
It is called the Knfb, which stands for Kurzweil National Federation of the Blind, because the National Federation of the Blind now owns Kurzweil Reading Technology. Ray's gone off and doing other things. And still is involved in the development, but it's called the Knfb Reader Mobile. And you can get it in the Apple Store or Google Play. It's $99. You can even get it from the Microsoft Store on a PC. So you can use like a webcam to take pictures as well. So it is not yet available for the Mac. But it is available in Windows, it's available in iOS, it's available in Android. And it's $99. Except I will say that from time to time there are occasional sales that will offer for a short period of time a price reduction. Mostly though, $99. Which is not expensive for the ability to read a lot of material and read it well. It's the best OCR product on the market. There are cheaper and sometimes free OCR apps available both from the Apple Store, the Apple App Store, and Google Play. They don't have the patented Kurzweil processing technology within them that Kurzweil does. It is still the best product on the market.
Here comes the next question.
Oh, good. We like questions.
Hi, Michael, it's Michelle. So going back to, you spoke a lot about the attitude regarding the educational needs of students with visual impairments.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because I find, as a teacher of students with visual impairments, I find I'm sometimes, actually very often, up against a wall in trying to convey such as expanded core education, why it is important to be able to teach, especially like for O&M, public transportation, how to use an escalator, street crossings, and the amount of time that's necessary to do that, for me, needs to be outside of the school hours also. Just curious, what your thoughts are regarding that.
Let me tell you a story. Does that sound good? So there is an organization in Colorado called the Colorado Center for the Blind, run by a woman named Julie Deaton. And every summer, every day, the center teaches what it calls a philosophy or business course. The center is a residential organization where people, not only from Colorado, but from other states come because they are losing their eyesight or they never learned blindness skills, and they will spend 9 months or so at the center to learn to be blind, right? They learn a lot of the skills that most people learn when they're growing up because they can see how people do it and they mimic and they get to see. And so the center, as much as anything, teaches philosophy about blindness as it does teaching basic techniques. The O&M instructors are mostly blind. A lot of the instructors are blind because blind people can teach those skills, although a lot of the O&M world doesn't believe it. I could spend a lot of time telling you some of those stories, but I want to stick with this. Every summer, Julie, one day during the summer, will walk in at the beginning of the philosophy class with a bunch of envelopes and give one to every student who is at the center. And she says, "These are tickets to tonight's Colorado's Rockies game. Your job, get there, find your seat, and enjoy the game." Period. She doesn't tell them how to do it, other than they have to do it. You can have students who have been there 7, 8 months or so, or students who arrived yesterday. The rules are the same. What happens is the older students help the newer students to do it, to call the bus company, find out the bus schedule or whatever, get to the stadium. The more experienced students help them to go and ask questions of the ushers, how do I get to section C or whatever, and get the information they need so that they can independently go to their seats and sit and do it. What I'm saying is, oftentimes we make some of the techniques that we talk about a lot harder than they need to be. You said the whole concept of teaching someone to use an escalator. Very frankly, why is that difficult? You go up to the escalator with your cane. You learn that the escalator is there because you feel it with the cane. We need to let our students explore and sometimes fail and hopefully learn to succeed. But I know what you're saying. You run up against a wall that you can't do all of that during the business hours of school. But what you've got to do is get those students to recognize that they're going to go through the same challenges as a sighted kid learning to walk on an escalator. And sighted kids have to learn to walk on an escalator. Why is it different for me as a blind child to learn to walk on an escalator? it goes back to our attitude. We make it more complicated than we need to be. And you may very well disagree with me in saying that, because the O&M world has taught you that you've got to teach blind kids to do all these things. But the reality is, why should it be more complicated or more specialized to teach me to do it than to teach a sighted child to do it? If I learn proper cane travel, if you have taught me not only proper cane travel and cane techniques, but most important, taught me the confidence to use my cane, I'll learn to travel that escalator just like a sighted kid will learn through watching the escalator with their depth perception and so on. They learn how to walk on that escalator, and they learn that at some point they've got to step on and expect their foot to move because the escalator moves. It has to be that it becomes as automatic for me and as philosophically easy for me to go on the escalator as it does anyone else. Now, the thing you didn't mention is some of the walls that you run against are the parents, right?
Correct.
Yeah, because the parents are all afraid because their poor child is blind. And that is a barrier that exists all too often. My best answer to you is, let's get those parents in touch with successful blind people. And we can do that. I can help you with that. Let's get them to see that there are successful blind people who are out in the world, and they're not exceptions, they've just learned. Let me tell you another story about Don Morris. Don is a gentleman I met in Iowa when I started working with Ray Kurzweil in the National Federation of the Blind early on. And I got hired by the Federation when they decided to work with Ray. And my job was to take Kurzweil reading machines, these $50,000 devices, and set them up in libraries and at some blindness agencies around the country, and then literally travel daily to go from one place to another to see how people were using the machines, make sure that they're using them properly, give them more instruction, write training curriculum, and so on. And at the end of 18 months, create a set of recommendations that had to go into the production of the first machines that made the first production model. So I met Don in Iowa. Don was born sighted, but was a type 1 diabetic. And you can see where this story might be going. In his late 20s, he lost his eyesight due to diabetic retinopathy and went to the Iowa Commission for the Blind to learn about blindness. At that time, the Iowa Commission was the best agency and the most positive from a philosophical standpoint about blindness in the country. This is in kind of the mid to late 60s. So Don was there for 9 months. Before Don went blind, he worked for Iowa Bell when it was all part of the big Bell system. And Don was in charge, well, Don wasn't in charge of, Don was a sales guy selling business communication systems to people around Iowa. He was the most successful sales guy by far in Iowa. His nearest competitor sold less than half of what he sold. He was good. And knowing Don, he's a good talker. But he was good at his job. He lost his eyesight. He went to Iowa Commission for the Blind, came out of the Iowa Commission for the Blind, and went back to doing exactly what he had been doing before, selling business systems for Iowa Bell. And you know what? He continued to outpace his nearest rival by over a factor of 2. Now, unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. One day, Don learned that there was a job announcement calling for the hiring of a teacher to teach salespeople to do what Don was doing and what the other salespeople were doing, teaching new people and even people who may not have been so successful how to sell well. So Don applied for the job. And the Bell people said, well, you know, you're doing great where you are. We really don't want you to change. We would really rather you stay. You're bringing in lots of money for us, so we don't want you to go off and take this other job. And he said, but it's a promotion, and I ought to have access to a promotion like anyone else. Yeah, we know, but you're doing so well. He contacted the Iowa Commission, and through investigation found out that what was really going on was that Iowa Bell didn't think that he, because he was blind, could teach people how to do what he was doing. Go figure that. When that was discovered, Don quit. He quit the Bell program. He kind of accidentally took his customer database with him, and he formed his own company. And he went back to all of his customers and to new customers and said, I will charge you half of what you will save over 3 years if you had purchased from Iowa Bell. So if they're going to charge you $500,000, and I charge you, and I could sell it to you for $200,000, then I save you $300,000, so you pay me $150,000, and that's what you owe me. Don told me the last year he paid taxes, he paid more in taxes than he made in his last year at Iowa Bell. He did that because he learned what it was like to be blind, and that blindness wasn't the problem, it was attitudes. Do you see what I'm saying? So I know that that problem exists. I know it's a real challenge for parents, but let's get those parents to see successful blind people and what they do, and let them interact with role models, and let their kids interact with role models. I mean, that's what anyone does, right? When kids are growing up, their parents are supposed to be role models. They teach them how to tie shoes and other things like that just because they see it. It needs to be the same way for blind kids. And so we just don't have as many role models, and the parents need those role models for their kids and for themselves. So we can do that. I mentioned the gentleman that has the 10-year-old daughter. He is going to the convention of the National Federation of the Blind of Colorado this week because there are a whole lot of successful blind people there. And the National Federation of the Blind is the first organization that told him, your child shouldn't be getting just 3 or 4 hours of mobility a month. Your child should be learning Braille, and we can help you with those things. But most important, your child needs to learn that she's okay. And so we can help with that. And I'm glad to assist you in getting you contacts and getting you in touch with people to help break down those barriers. Because I recognize that's the biggest problem that all of you as teachers face, probably is what your parents of students won't let you do, right? And so we can help with that. Some people are very stubborn and they're very afraid, and I appreciate that, but blindness shouldn't be what they're afraid of.
Another question, Michael.
Yes, my question is, there is any technology out there that is for like early learners between the 3 to 5 years old? I really like the concept that you have for the elders, but to start helping the kids at this age.
And the answer is sure. 3 to 5 year old is almost not too young to start to learn to read Braille. 3 to 5 year old is not too young to start to learn to use a cane. I've been to conventions of the National Federation of the Blind where parents have brought their 3-year-olds and they've been given a short cane, and within a day those kids are running around the hotels and the parents are dragging. It's not too early to even do those basic things. It's teaching attitudes. There are some technologies that are available even to help at a very young age learn about Braille and learn about some of the basic blindness skills. And some of that stuff can be gotten through organizations like the National Federation of the Blind. The American Foundation for the Blind has some things such as the Braille Bug, which can be used for young students as well. And they can start to learn basic skills. But the biggest thing that you have to do with really young kids like that is to get their parents to let them be kids, and to get their parents to understand that when the children make a mistake or bump into something, it's not the time to become afraid, it's the time to use it as a teaching moment. I was like 2.5 or 3 years old in Chicago. I had one of these little cars, you know, you get into it and you race around and all that sort of stuff. And I had it in our apartment, and I raced around, and one day smashed right into a coffee table and cut under my chin, and I can still feel the scar. What my mother said was, rather than you can't use the car anymore, or oh, you can't do that because you can't see, she said, you got to learn to listen where you're going. After we came back from the hospital and I had a couple stitches, but she said, you got to learn to listen and watch where you're going. And that was her response. That's very unusual, but I understood that. And I never did crash again. At 7, I rode a bike. I rode a bike around our neighborhood. We had moved to California. I rode a bike around the neighborhood, and I'll tell that story this afternoon. Neighbors went crazy, but I rode a bike around the neighborhood just like anyone else. At that age, it's as much about getting the parents to let their kids be kids just like any other kid. And if there are other siblings, encouraging the kids to play together just like any family encourages kids to play together, or not. Does that make sense?
Yes. Here comes another one.
Another one.
Well, I just wanted to say that I really like that you said that your mother said listen, because listen where you're going. Because I learned in the past year with our student that we try to stay not absolutely quiet, but quiet enough for him to listen where the command is. He is legally blind, but we also notice that he still can see a little bit. But for him to get closer, he needs to listen. And we are having an inclusion class. So he mingles with the regular ed. And it's amazing to see that even the other class is learning to kind of lower the tone so he can listen and follow that instruction so he can go to the red chair because he can still see the red chair. And for the parents, that, like you said, it is interesting because there's some of the parents that are still not accepting. And it's, like you said, it's hard to introduce them to something new. And how will you introduce them to that? To start, don't be afraid of that new.
Well, it's as much, so let's talk about the red chair. Is there only one red chair?
No, all of them are red.
Oh, there you go. So it makes it easy then. You don't. But if there's a particular one that you want him to go to, then you have to provide the direction. See, what I'm getting at is, yes, I understand that he can see, but he should be learning the techniques that I would use not seeing it at all, in addition to the techniques of being able to see it. If you simply totally rely on eyesight, he's never going to learn the other techniques that will make things more effective for him. So, for example, learning to use a cane ought to really be under sleep shades, because he's got to learn those techniques. Otherwise, the day's going to come that he's going to be traveling at night and not be able to see anything, and he could walk off of a curb, walk and fall down a flight of stairs because he wasn't using a cane or wasn't using it properly. It's important to do that. But more important, make it a game for the other kids too, so that they discover that what he does is just as okay as what they do. Don't make him conform to a visually centric world. Make it an inclusive world, which includes vision and eyesight, but also includes tactile and blindness techniques. And teach everyone some of those techniques. You'll find that kids will be more curious than you might imagine. But if they just view him as the slow guy because he can't see as well, that's the problem. So kids are pretty smart, and generally kids catch on to things pretty well if you bring them into the whole system. And so it isn't and shouldn't just be about go find a chair by using the eyesight. That child should be using a cane. If he has to get closer before he can see the chair, then he should be using a cane, I submit to you. And you've got to start that process. Again, you get to the point of, well, but the child can see, the parents will say, he doesn't need to do that. Yeah, that only works for so long. And that's why I say there are a lot of role models. There are a lot of adults who are partially sighted who will sit there and tell you if only they had had the chance to learn to read Braille, if only they had learned the non-visual techniques and cane travel that totally blind kids got to learn to use, they would be much better off and be much more effective in their lives as adults today.
You've got 2 minutes.
That's what I say too. 2 minutes. Okay. Yes, next question.
I'm not seeing any.
Okay.
Just giving you the warning to conclude.
So what I hope that you get out of this is it's not all about technology. It is as much about a philosophy, and that you adopting a philosophy as teachers that blindness is okay, that we're going to teach our children who don't have full access to eyesight techniques of being blind, and through that they will then be a lot more efficient. I can sit here and use this device or use Braille on a sheet of paper and read it several hundred words a minute. Show me people and children who use enlarged print or magnification devices. Show me children that can do that. If you can, I'll stop talking about it. But the reality is that isn't the way it works. Not only read it, but comprehend it, by the way. We've got to give our children the full opportunity to function. And the reality is the best of both worlds will give partially sighted kids a better chance, and it will make the world a more inclusive one for totally blind kids who are in classes where a lot of those techniques are used. So teach all of the kids what it's like to be blind, not just the blind kids or the partially blind kids. Teach the sighted kids too what it's like to be blind, and that it's okay to be blind. I know all about eyesight. I can sit here and talk to you physics-wise all about light and eyesight and so on. But in reality, I don't see. But I've observed for the last 67 years, now you know, what it is like to see. So I've got a pretty good idea of eyesight, although I don't do it, and I don't fully have the option of conforming to it, but I understand it. And I think that it's appropriate to expect the reverse of that for sighted people in blindness as well. Thanks all, and this has been a lot of fun. I hope it's been helpful. Have you found this helpful? Yes. Then you can congratulate Kathy. Come here.
Hello, Michael. I'm here.
You're
Holly.
here.
To go to lunch. How are you? Fine. How are you?